The coffee mug hit the marble floor before I even registered I'd dropped it. Time fractured around me. One heartbeat to watch the handle snap, the next to hear the porcelain shatter into a constellation of shards skittering across the pristine lobby tiles. Each fragment glittered like a tiny betrayal under the chandelier's glow. For a suspended moment, the polished hush of the Ludmere Hotel held its breath. And then the clerk's voice cut through, crisp and unyielding. "Mr. Walker, I apologize, but I cannot find your reservation." I blinked as if vibration behind my eyelids might reset the scene. "Can you check again?" My voice felt too calm, like a measured plume escaping a burst balloon. "Weston Walker. My wife is sold. Said she booked it weeks ago." I squeezed my thumbs against the sides of my overnight bag, bracing myself not to grip my teeth. He hesitated, eyes flicking to the keyboard's glow, fingers pausing mid-tap. "Sir, we have bookings for the Burtons." "That's your wife's family name, correct?" "A suite for her parents. Another for Mrs. Isolde Burton Walker and her siblings. But nothing under your name." Click, click, click. The clerk's fingertips tapped the keys in a staccato that sounded like a verdict. Behind him, the lobby's professionals and tourists glanced up, their curiosity masked behind practiced, neutral expressions. Some carried glossy brochures. Others adjusted their suitcases as though preparing for a runway. Unaware they were witnessing a different kind of arrival. Then the sharp click of heels approached, slicing through the slight hum of air conditioning. My heart pitched forward, but I leaned back into stillness. I recognized that tread even before I saw the designer stitch of her heels. My wife emerged, draped in silk and condescension, her lips curved in that patented smirk she wore whenever she felt above the room. "Oh, Weston finally made it," she drawled, voice silk over steel. She tilted her chin. "How strange. No reservation? Must be some mix-up." Her tone smelled of amusement, like watching a child fumble with building blocks. I watched her eyes flick to my hand, to the dent the bag had made against my hip, then back to the clerk as she offered her own practiced apology. "I only made reservations for our real family," she whispered loud enough for half the lobby to hear. She paused, flashing that smug smile that always felt calibrated for maximum effect. "Wouldn't want my precious family inconvenienced by her smirk widened, soaking in the theatrics, by a support act." Behind her, her mother lifted a diamond-studded scarf from her draped shoulders, chin held high. Her father, engrossed in his phone, pretended an invisible shield separated him from my existence. A cluster of her friends sipped cocktails with the kind of performative confusion reserved for staged charity events, lips parted, expression blank. Cameras hovered discreetly by the concierge desk, capturing every nuance to upload onto social feeds. I stood frozen for a beat, feeling the tick of seconds echo like distant thunder. Then I inhaled, allowing calm to anchor me. I made myself look at each of them in turn, first the clerk, mortified by the electric tension, then my wife, basking in her twisted triumph, then the witness gallery, mouths opening and closing behind polite hands. I let the quiet gather in my chest until it steadied my voice. "I see." I inclined my head, bag slipping from my shoulder to settle at my feet. My fingers brushed broken porcelain, but I didn't look down. "Then I'll leave." The words floated out, soft but irrevocable. No plea, no anger, just observation, an acknowledgement of their choice. There was a muffled gasp, somewhere between a hotel guest's stifled sympathy and a friend's silent horror. My wife's lips twitched, a faltering afterthought of superiority. Mother and father glanced at each other, eyebrows knotted. Her friends lowered their glasses, eyes darting. Even the clerk paused mid-breath, fingers hovering over the keyboard like a conductor uncertain of his next movement. But I didn't wait for them to respond. My jaw unclenched, and I bent to retrieve my overnight bag. The smell of coffee beans and polished leather trailed behind me as I pivoted away from the spectacle. Each step on the marble floor was measured, as though I traveled a path of my own forging. I could feel their eyes tracking me, curiosity, discomfort, tiny pricks of guilt. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Outside, the city's pulse resumed around me, car horns ricocheting against glass facades, taxi meters rattling awake, pedestrians weaving through the morning rush. The concrete and steel offered anonymity I hadn't realized I craved. I hailed a cab, stilling my hand so it didn't shake. Sliding into the back seat, I let the doors seal me into a capsule of possibility. My overnight bag settled at my feet like a promise waiting to be kept. The clerk's voice crackled through a callback I silenced before it finished. He left a voicemail that I'd never listened to. My wife sent texts, taunts, and pleas interwoven, each a fraying thread of the illusions she'd woven. But I didn't look. I didn't respond. Instead, I stared out the window at the city waking up, its streets etched in gold blotches of sunrise. In that measured silence, I realized what really shattered that morning was more than porcelain. It was the carefully curated facade of my marriage, the polished veneer of entitlement, the illusion that I belonged as a mere accessory in a family's grand gallery. They had performed their charade in a lobby of marble and gossip, but justice, quiet, deliberate, had already begun. As the cab turned onto the avenue, I reached for my phone and dialed the one person who understood truth over theatrics. My Godfather's voice answered, solid as bedrock, and in that steady baritone, I heard the first echo of retribution unfolding. Beneath the hum of the city, I felt the calm power of the moment. The walls of illusion were cracking, and I was the one holding the final piece. I didn't yell. I didn't demand. I didn't beg. I walked out of that lobby with my bag over my shoulder and my dignity clutched tighter than the strap. The cold air slapped my face the moment the glass doors slid shut behind me, a sharp contrast to the artificial warmth of the hotel and its carefully curated cruelty. I stood on the curb outside the Ludmere, the sounds of the city weaving around me, honking horns, murmurs of passing couples, a distant siren crying through the maze of buildings. I didn't belong there anymore. Maybe I never did. I raised my arm and hailed a cab. One pulled over almost instantly. The driver didn't say a word, just nodded as I gave him an address uptown. I slid into the back seat, my fingers still cold from the porcelain floor, and sank into the torn leather that had probably seen more heartbreak than therapy couches ever would. It wasn't about a hotel room. It was about erasure. It was about being deliberately and publicly cut out of something I was supposed to belong to. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of paying down Isolde's private school debts, sitting through her father's endless political fundraising dinners, smiling through snide remarks from her mother about my working-class roots. 3 years of playing the role of the silent, reliable husband in the background of her glossy life. And now this, erased with a single swipe of a luxury Amex and a carefully curated guest list. The cab swerved around a delivery truck, and I let my forehead rest lightly against the cool window. The city lights blurred against the glass, a kaleidoscope of ambition and indifference. I could still hear her voice. I only made reservations for our real family echoing in my skull like the aftermath of a gunshot. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered for a second before I tapped the contact I hadn't called in almost a year. Augustus Lyon, my godfather, my late father's closest friend. A man who didn't say much, didn't post anything, and didn't need to remind anyone who he was. He ran a quiet empire, one of those names whispered in boardrooms and feared in negotiations. He'd always been there in the background of my life, never overbearing, never flashy, but I knew if I called, he'd answer. And he did. Weston. His voice was like a velvet hammer, smooth, but heavy with purpose. What happened? I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't even lead with a polite greeting. I just laid it out, bare and brutal. From the broken mug to the missing reservation. From the smirks to the dismissal. No anger, no venom, just the facts. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. Then he exhaled, slow and deliberate. Understood, he said. Let me make a few calls. That was it. No promise. No outreach. Just those 6 words. And in that moment, I knew things were already beginning to shift. The cab rolled to a stop in front of my apartment, but I didn't get out. I looked at the building, the lights off in our unit, the one Isolde and I had shared. Or rather, the one I paid for while she decorated it like a museum exhibit. I stayed seated as the meter clicked forward. I didn't want to go upstairs. Not yet. Not with her voice still clawing at my pride. Instead, I told the driver to keep going. I needed time. Space. Distance from the echo of her laughter and the phantom of her perfume. The car rolled on, and I watched the city roll by, each streetlight a reminder that somewhere in this endless concrete maze, there were people who knew how to treat others with decency. My phone buzzed. A text from Isolde. Weston, don't be dramatic. Then another. You could have stayed with my brother. Followed by, why are you making this into a scene? I stared at the screen. No apology. No accountability. just more of the same condescension wrapped in silk. The cab turned down Madison, passing storefronts bathed in cold light. I leaned back, letting my eyes close for a moment. Another buzz. Another message. This one with a new tone. Can we talk? Then, are you okay? And finally, please call me. I didn't reply. The phone buzzed again, but it wasn't her this time. It was Augustus. One line, one message. Go to the Midtown property. The key code is still the same. Rest. Let me handle the rest. I read it 3 times, then gave the driver the new address. The Lion residences were quiet, discreet, secure. The kind of place billionaires loan to diplomats and disappear into when the spotlight's too harsh. Augustus had kept a penthouse there since I was a teenager. I remembered staring up at it once, thinking it looked like a castle carved into glass. The doorman didn't blink as I entered. The elevator ride was silent, and when the door slid open, the penthouse greeted me like a sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows stared out over the skyline. Minimalist furniture, dark wood floors, a bar stocked with everything I'd never drink, and bookshelves filled with things I actually would. I dropped my bag and sat on the long charcoal couch, the city stretching out beneath me. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My phone buzzed again. A dozen missed calls from Isolde. 3 voicemails. And a message from her mother. You embarrassed Isolde today. Not everything is about you. I laughed, quietly, bitterly. Then came the final message from Augustus, forwarded to me as well as every Burton in his contacts. Effective immediately, I am withdrawing all Burton family assets held in my management, including the Ludmere Hotel shares. Weston is the sole trustee of the Walker Lion estate. Your treatment of him was noted. Actions have consequences. I stared at the screen. I had been erased. But now, I was the highlighter, and I had just drawn a bright yellow line through their perfect little facade. It took less than 30 minutes. 30 minutes from the moment Augustus said, "Let me make a few calls," to when my phone turned into a siren. It started with the buzzing, soft, persistent, like a warning hum you feel in your bones before a storm. I let it buzz for a while. Watched the screen light up and dim, light up again, blinking with names I no longer recognized as comfort. Isolde, her mother, her sister, her cousin Serena, all of them stacked one after another, their names flashing across my phone like falling dominoes. When I finally picked it up, I didn't tap open a single one. I just stared. The first message from Isolde came in sharp. Weston, don't be so dramatic. It was always her tone. Accusation draped in silk, superiority wrapped in false calm. I imagined her sitting on one of the velvet lobby sofas, cocktail in hand, one leg crossed over the other like she was watching a performance she was too bored to care about. Then the next one. You could have stayed with my brother. You didn't have to cause a scene. I smirked without humor. It wasn't a scene. It was clarity. A crack in the flawless glass of our marriage that had been forming for months. No, years. And finally gave way under the weight of her disdain. More followed. Why are you acting like this? What are you trying to prove? This is so unlike you. And then a shift, timid, performative, but I recognized the desperation starting to seep in. Can we talk? Are you okay? Please call me. The moment the messages turned from correction to concern, I knew the winds had shifted. She had received the news. And sure enough, within minutes came the chain reaction. Augustus had fired the shot. A public, concise email sent directly to the Burton family and their advisors, with me copied on the thread. Effective immediately, I am withdrawing all Burton family assets under my management, including shares held in the Ludmere Group. Weston Walker is the sole trustee of the Walker Lion estate. I have witnessed his character, his integrity, and now, his treatment by those who benefited from his silence. That silence ends now. I read it 3 times. I wasn't just part of a family empire. I was the one holding the pen now. A notification chimed as a new message popped in. This one from Maribel Burton, Isolde's mother. You embarrassed Isolde today? Not everything is about you. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly in character. Her default was blame, always blame. I closed the message without replying. I wasn't going to fight with ghosts anymore. Instead, I walked to the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows and watched the skyline. The city pulsed quietly beneath me, the lights of 1,000 lives flickering in apartments, restaurants, offices. Somewhere out there, Isolde was likely pacing a hotel hallway, tears that weren't for me streaking her perfectly set makeup, trying to calculate how much she could salvage with charm alone. I'd spent 3 years playing a part in her story. The quiet husband. The accessory. The wallet when needed. The sounding board when convenient. The ghost when not. I'd excused it all. The missed anniversaries. The way she left me out of photos at events. The constant pressure to adjust, to fit into a life she had already cast before she met me. I'd told myself I could endure it, that love meant compromise, that she just needed time. But this erasure? This was deliberate. The hotel reservation was the final punctuation at the end of a long, passive-aggressive sentence she'd been writing for years. My phone continued to vibrate. A torrent of notifications now, social media tags, forwarded screenshots, a few reporters sniffing around. Someone had leaked the lobby scene. A tabloid account posted a blurry photo of me leaving the Ludmere. The caption read, Isolde Burton Walker's husband caught storming out after check-in drama. Trouble in paradise? The comments were already flooded with speculation, snark, and sympathy. Most of it was directed at Isolde. That was her domain. Public image. I should have cared. Maybe a part of me did. But most of me was calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending. Then a text came in that made me pause. Not from Isolde. Not from her mother. Not even from Augustus. It was from Ria, Isolde's assistant. A woman I'd barely spoken to outside of scheduling and polite greetings. The text was short. I've worked with them for 3 years. You were the only one who ever said, thank you. The only one who asked how I was doing. I just wanted to say, I saw you today. I mean, really saw you. Not everyone forgot what dignity looks like. It hit me in the center of my chest. Not because it was grand, but because it was true. It was quiet validation from someone with no reason to give it, no incentive to choose a side. She wasn't trying to save face. She was just human. And in that moment, that small, kind acknowledgement meant more than all the grand gestures Isolde ever performed for an audience. I put the phone down. I didn't reply to Ria right away. I needed to sit with the words. I sat on the edge of the penthouse couch, hands steepled together, breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth until my heart slowed. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about retribution. It was about release. Release from a life where I had to prove I belonged. Release from the burden of constantly shrinking to make others feel comfortable. Release from a marriage that had become a mirror, one where I saw only what she allowed me to see, never what I truly was. The messages didn't stop. They came in waves. Apologies wrapped in manipulation. Explanations disguised as excuses. And beneath all of them, the slow realization settling into their perfect little world. Weston Walker was no longer a background character. I was no longer the afterthought. I was the heir, the one with the power they thought was safely buried beneath paperwork and old grief. But Augustus hadn't forgotten, and neither had I. I stood and crossed to the bar, poured a drink, not for comfort, but for clarity. The ice clinked softly as I swirled it. Then I made a single call, not to Isolde, not to her father, not even to the press. I called the Ludmere's general manager. Mr. Walker, he said, clearly rattled. From now on, I said, calmly, I want the suite once held by the Burtons to be permanently reassigned. You'll rename it the Walker Suite. Use the same decor. Just change the plaque. And remove their access entirely. He stammered for a moment, then replied, Yes, sir. Of course. Immediately. I ended the call and stepped back to the window. Let them echo in their own silence. Let them choke on the absence they carved. I wasn't part of their story anymore. I was writing my own. I didn't return home. I couldn't. Not to that apartment with its curated neutral tones, its perfectly staged bookshelves and unlit candles, a place that looked more like a showroom than a home. Everything in it had been chosen by Isolde to impress guests or followers, never for comfort, never for us. I left it all behind and instead went to the one place in the city where my presence still meant something, the Lion Residences in Midtown. The building was discreet, secure, silent. It didn't flaunt wealth, it exhaled it. And Augustus had made it clear with one message, it's yours for as long as you need it. The next morning she came. I heard the knock on the door before I even reached for my coffee. I didn't rush. Let her wait. Let her stand in the quiet hallway and feel what stillness without power tasted like. When I finally opened it, there she was, Isolde, in oversized sunglasses that couldn't hide the puffiness around her eyes. Her hair wasn't perfect this time. She wore an expensive wool coat, but the polish wasn't there. She didn't look like the version of herself the world had come to admire. She looked like someone who had finally realized the stage lights had turned off. "You blindsided me," she said, stepping in as if she still had permission to. She always did that, entered spaces like they were owed to her. I said nothing, just walked to the kitchen, poured my coffee, and let her find her footing in the silence. "You humiliated me in public," she continued, as if that were the worst crime that could be committed. "You embarrassed my family." She dropped her handbag onto the couch and peeled off her gloves like she was preparing to cross-examine me. Still, I said nothing. Because for all her talk, not once, did she say the words that might have meant something. "I'm sorry." She circled the room like a bird in a shrinking cage. "Do you know how this makes me look? How hard I've worked to keep everything balanced, everything elevated, and now." Her voice cracked slightly, and she paused to fix herself. She couldn't even cry without adjusting for lighting. "Now the contracts are pulling back. My agent said Lion and Hart have cut me. Cancelled. No explanation. No negotiation. They said the board made the call." I took a sip of my coffee and finally spoke. "Augustus owns the board." Her face twitched. Anger? Hurt? Confusion? I couldn't tell. Maybe all of them. She looked around the room, at the minimal luxury, the skyline through the glass, the absence of any sign of her. "So this is where you ran off to?" "I didn't run," I said calmly. "I walked. With purpose." She dropped onto the arm of the couch, clutching the fabric of her coat as if she needed to hold on to something. "You don't understand. My trust fund access frozen. The joint investments on hold. Even the credit cards aren't clearing. What are you doing to me?" I stared at her, and I finally let the stillness crack. "What did you do to me, Isolde? For 3 years. Not in one moment, not in one fight. But slowly, carefully, you erased me. At dinners, at events, in your posts, in your life. I was just convenient. Until I wasn't." She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "I paid off your debts. I helped your father clean up his campaign finances. I showed up for you even when you didn't want me there. And yesterday, I walked into a hotel where I was supposed to be a guest and found out I wasn't even on the list. Not forgotten. Omitted. Strategically." She turned her head to the side. "That wasn't how it was meant. It was exactly how it was meant," I said. "You wanted the optics of family without the inconvenience of me. You built your image with me in the background. But I'm not your background." Silence filled the room again. And then she tried the oldest trick in her book, pivoting to vulnerability. "I messed up, Weston," she said, and for the first time, her voice softened. "I didn't think you'd take it this far. I thought you'd be upset, sure, but this." She gestured around her. "This is war." I shook my head. "No, Isolde. This isn't war. This is withdrawal. I'm not fighting you. I'm leaving the table. And you're panicking because you finally have to stand on your own." She went quiet after that, stared out the window like she could see the future crumbling behind the skyscrapers. Before she left, she tried one last swing. "You know the Ludmere was your father's favorite hotel. Do you really think he'd want you to punish us this way?" I stood then, tall and calm. "My father taught me that forgiveness without accountability is permission, and I'm done giving you permission to mistreat me." Her expression shifted. Not sadness, not even anger, just loss. The realization that the mask she'd worn for so long no longer worked. She left quietly after that. Didn't slam the door. Didn't cry. Just gathered her things and walked out into the elevator like someone carrying the weight of everything they thought they'd never lose. I stood in the quiet for a long time after she left. Not in triumph, not in rage, but in peace. I didn't have to raise my voice to be heard. I didn't have to lash out to be strong. I had chosen a line, and I stood behind it. Later that day, Augustus texted me. She called, begged. I said nothing, just like you asked. I replied, "Thank you." He responded, "This isn't about revenge. It's about memory. Never forget what they showed you when they thought you had nothing." I didn't. That night, I poured myself a glass of something I usually reserved for special occasions. Not because I wanted to celebrate, but because I wanted to mark the beginning of something real. No illusions, no pretense, just me. The man who finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in a room he helped pay for. 3 days later, I got a call from Finn Delgado, Isolde's brother-in-law. I hadn't spoken to Finn since their engagement dinner 2 years ago, an awkward, over-decorated affair where the Burtons acted as if they'd invited royalty, not extended family. I remembered how Finn kept refilling his glass just to get through the toasts. He always seemed like the only one in that circle with both eyes open. So when his name flashed across my screen, I hesitated. Then I answered. "Weston," he said, low and hurried. "You got a minute?" "Not sure you're on the approved callers list anymore," I said, only half joking. "I get it," he replied quickly. "But this isn't one of those fake apologies. I'm not calling to defend them. I'm calling because you need to know something." I leaned back in the chair, eyeing the skyline through the Lion penthouse window. "Go ahead." "She's a mess," he said. "Turns out she maxed out the black card again. Tried to wire money from one of the accounts you're on, got blocked. She was planning some kind of image restructure, whatever that means. Supposedly pitching a show idea, something like Burton Dynasty. She already had meetings lined up." I almost laughed. Of course she did. Isolde had always been in love with herself in third person. She didn't want a marriage. She wanted a storyline. Finn kept going. But that's not even the big part. Her parents? They co-signed a $600,000 loan. Assumed your name was part of the collateral. They did what? I asked, sitting up straighter. Yeah, her father told his financial guy you'd back it. Guess he figured marriage meant you'd cover whatever they cooked up. My chest tightened, not with shock, but with a slow, bitter confirmation. They'd never respected me. They respected my signature, my silence, my ability to absorb their messes without question. You're the only stable person in that orbit, Finn added. Always were. I was never part of their orbit, I replied. I was just their background decoration. There was a long silence on the line, like he wasn't sure how much truth he could admit without losing his position in their crumbling kingdom. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, he said finally. But after what they pulled, look, you didn't deserve that. No, I said. I didn't. That night, I opened Instagram out of morbid curiosity. I hadn't posted in months. Never felt the need to advertise my life like it was for sale. But Isolde had. And now, staring back at me was a story she'd uploaded 2 hours earlier. A black screen. White text. Her signature font. Betrayal is worst when it wears a smile. Subtle. Vague. Precisely calculated to trigger sympathy from her followers. And it worked. The comments poured in. Heart emojis. Stay strong messages. A few speculating on infidelity. Some offering prayers like she'd just survived a war. I shook my head. She wasn't trying to recover from pain. She was trying to rewrite the story. Let them believe whatever they wanted. That I cheated. That I abandoned her. That I'd gone cold or cruel. She was marketing her victimhood now, and that required an enemy. But I wasn't going to fight her. I wasn't going to post a rebuttal or correct the record. I didn't need to. Truth had a long tail, and it was already catching up to her. Later that evening, I got an email from my attorney. The trust accounts tied to the Burton joint ventures were officially suspended. A quiet audit had been launched, standard, but thorough. Any misuse of funds, especially involving my signature or implied consent, would be addressed swiftly. There would be no backroom resolutions this time. No favors. No cushions. For years, I let them move in my shadow, borrow my stability, wear my loyalty like armor they didn't earn. But now they were exposed, and I didn't have to lift a finger. The next day, I ran into someone unexpected. I'd gone for a quiet lunch at a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of Midtown, one of those places where the servers know your name but not your business. As I sipped my espresso and scrolled through emails, a shadow passed across the table. Weston. I looked up. Amy, Isolde's cousin. 19, maybe 20. Bright eyes. Nervous smile. She always seemed like she was trying to disappear at those family events, standing just outside the spotlight's glow. Hi, I said, carefully. She hesitated, then sat down across from me like she didn't know where else to go. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I know that probably doesn't mean much, coming from me. It means more than you think, I said. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I looked up to you, you know? You were the only one who didn't pretend all the time. The only one who noticed when someone was uncomfortable. I nodded slowly. That's kind of you to say. I hope you know, not everyone in the family agrees with what they did. I believed her. Maybe not about the whole family, but enough. There were always watchers in a system like the Burtons. People who observed, who felt, but didn't speak. Until someone finally broke the script. As she stood to leave, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small white box. The hair clip. Freshwater pearls. I'd bought it for her birthday last year. when she mentioned in passing how much she loved the one her grandmother used to wear. I was going to give it to her at the next family dinner, but that dinner never happened. Everything exploded before then. She took it with wide eyes. You remembered? Some things are worth remembering. She hugged me, quickly, awkwardly, and then vanished into the sidewalk crowd, clutching the box like it was something rare. I sat there long after she left, letting the stillness settle over me like a blanket. The Burtons had played their games for years. They'd built a house of mirrors, smoke and smiles and status updates. But when the light came in, the reflection cracked. And now, piece by piece, the image was unraveling. The credit cards were declining. The banks were calling. The contractors were backing out. And Isolde was spinning a new fiction every hour to stay afloat. But I wasn't watching anymore. I had stepped outside the theater. I wasn't waiting for justice. I was living it. And the silence on my end? That was the loudest sound they had ever heard. It didn't take long before the press got involved. Stories like ours, part scandal, part society drama, part digital betrayal, were too tempting to ignore. The initial whispers started on social media. A viral tweet speculating on the Burton Walker Hotel incident. Then a TikTok theory thread pulling screenshots from Isolde's Instagram, zooming in on my absence from recent photos. Someone even made a slideshow. 10 clues Isolde Burton Walker's marriage was already over. By the time the tabloids picked it up, it had taken on a life of its own. They ran with it. Married in name? Ignored in practice? Socialite's silent husband finally speaks with his feet. Is this the beginning of the Burton Empire's fall? I didn't comment. I didn't have to. Augustus did. Lion Ventures released a shareholder letter, simple, elegant, brutal. In it, Augustus formally introduced me as the successor to the private family fund. Not just executor, not interim. The next steward of the Walker Lion investment empire. $240 million in diversified assets. It wasn't performative. It wasn't petty. It was strategic. My name, for once, was front and center, and it was attached to something permanent. Augustus didn't use dramatic language. He never did. But every sentence felt like a hammer behind a velvet curtain. Mr. Walker's values align with our vision for the future. Ethical capital, sustainable innovation, long-term return built on integrity. That one word echoed through every office that received the letter. Integrity. It didn't matter if they knew what had happened between me and Isolde. They didn't need the gossip. They had the signal. And then, of course, came the scene at the board meeting. I hadn't planned to attend in person. I was going to dial in, but something in me shifted that morning. I pulled on a charcoal suit, knotted a burgundy tie, and showed up to the 24th floor of Lion Towers with a quiet calm. The room was glass, steel, and silence. Every major investor was there. Half of them stood when I entered. A few nodded. One clapped, just once, before realizing no one else followed. Isolde's mother, Maribel, was there too. She must have come to defend the family's position, a phrase she used often, usually after humiliating someone in a room they'd paid to be in. She walked in confidently, flanked by one of their lawyers, lips drawn in a line she probably thought made her look composed. Her scarf, always designer, always loud, was knotted tighter than usual. Security stopped her at the glass entrance. I watched the exchange unfold from the balcony above the conference floor, sipping my coffee. She pointed, argued, flashed her ID. They didn't budge. One of them gestured to the guest list. She wasn't on it, because I hadn't put her there, because I had control now. When she realized it, when the weight of it finally landed on her face, I saw a flicker of something that had never passed between us before, not disdain, not pity, not false civility. Fear. She left without looking up. The meeting proceeded without disruption. My name was voted into the record. Unanimous. My signature placed on the master ledger, a pen stroke that felt heavier than any marriage license I'd ever signed. That night, I opened a folder Augustus had left for me at the penthouse. Inside were old letters, my father's notes from his last year of work with Lion Ventures. Handwritten pages, thoughts on partnership, trust, and legacy. A line on one of the pages caught my breath. The loudest person in the room is usually trying to hide the weakest argument. Lead with silence. Let your results make the noise. My father was never flashy. He was never invited to the galas or praised in Isolde's family circles. But he built a foundation so steady it still carried me now. I was done trying to be accepted by people who mistook stillness for weakness. I was done shrinking myself to fit into their glass castles. Later that week, Isolde tried to re-enter the conversation. Not publicly, but privately. A courier delivered a thick, white envelope to the front desk. Handwritten on the front, Weston. No return address. Inside was a letter. Pages of it. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was a narration. A desperate attempt to control the framing again. She wrote about pressure. About being raised to perform. About not knowing how to love someone who didn't need her spotlight to survive. She told stories I'd heard before, twisting them into new angles. She said she missed the version of us from the first year. The version where I followed, and she led, and no one questioned who the real star was. There was one paragraph, though, that stood out. I never thought you'd actually leave. You always stayed. You were dependable, reliable, predictable. I never thought you'd be the one to walk away. It was meant to sound like a compliment. It wasn't. I folded the letter once, twice, tucked it into the drawer beside the hair clip I never gave Amy. I didn't respond. I wouldn't. The tabloids moved on eventually, as they always do. The story was fun while it lasted, but they needed new scandal, fresher faces. A socialite's downfall loses flavor quickly unless someone dies or files a lawsuit. Isolde tried to stay relevant. She posted a few sponsored collaborations with wellness brands, leaned into cryptic captions and grief-aesthetic photo shoots. But the comments shifted. The likes dropped. Her brand had been built on perfection, and now the cracks were permanent. Meanwhile, I moved quietly through the city, laying new groundwork. I set up interviews, not with press, but with community organizers. I sat down with startup founders. I attended roundtables on urban sustainability and ethical finance. No flash, just purpose. I didn't need applause. I needed traction. Everywhere I went, people expected the drama. They leaned in, waiting for gossip. I offered none. I listened more than I spoke. And in that space, I found something better than vindication. I found momentum. On the last Friday of the month, I passed by the Ludmere again. Just for a moment. The facade was the same. Opulent, excessive, almost defiant. But something felt different. Maybe it was me. I stood there for a while, watching guests roll their luggage through the revolving doors. A newlywed couple posed for a photo on the steps. A bellhop offered water to a little girl in a frilly white dress. All of it so pristine, so curated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the new key card Augustus had sent me earlier that morning. A small note had been tucked beside it. You're sweet now. Yours alone. I didn't go inside. I just smiled and walked on, coffee in hand, steps steady and unhurried. Let them keep their marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I was building something they couldn't touch. And this time, my name wasn't missing from the reservation. It was carved into the foundation. The Burton name used to open doors. It used to turn heads at fundraisers and guarantee handshakes at any boardroom table. It was synonymous with wealth, prestige, the illusion of generational power, until that illusion started to burn. Not all at once. No, the unraveling came like water creeping into the seams of a foundation, slow and subtle until the cracks could no longer hold the weight of pretense. The calls started pouring in, first to the family office, then to the lawyers, then directly to me. Creditors, suppliers, even a private aviation firm that had provided flights under the assumption of a long-standing arrangement. But without the trust-backed funds I'd withdrawn, without the lion umbrella covering their weather, the Burtons were just another wealthy-looking family with a house of cards behind them. The Ludmere Hotel, once a staple in their investment portfolio, was now under full audit. A forensic accountant team swept in at Augustus's direction, and what they found was a cocktail of inflated invoices, nepotistic contracts, and bloated expenses masked under event coordination. A shell game played by Maribel and her oldest son with my name sitting quietly at the bottom of the joint account until I'd removed it. That move, and the asset retraction that followed, made every lender nervous. Now they wanted answers. They wanted assurances. And the Burtons had neither. One of their townhouses in Soho went up for sale. Not publicly, too much pride for that. But quietly, through a whisper network of elite agents. Then I heard their family lawyer had resigned. Not because of conflict, because of exposure. He didn't want to be near what was coming. Isolde's sister, Simone, filed legal paperwork to separate her finances from the family trust. She claimed she'd been misled, co-signed an apartment in Tribeca under the belief it was a collective investment. She wasn't trying to save face. She was trying to save her own neck. Then came the call I didn't expect. Augustus rang me from his personal line. "They asked me to intervene," he said, his voice low and even, like a man reading from a record of disappointments. "Of course they did. They want to meet," he continued. "Privately. No press. No lawyers. Just you. To talk." "To talk," I repeated. "Now they want to talk. They say they want peace. What they want is relief," I replied. There was a pause. "I told them I'd relay the message," he said. "But I made it clear you're the one holding the reins now." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't need to think about it. I already knew the answer. That evening, I received a group email from a new Burton-affiliated address. One of their remaining aides still loyal enough to act as a buffer. The message was formal, dressed up in faux humility. "We believe a conversation would be mutually beneficial. Clarity can lead to closure, the preservation of legacy." All the polite phrases meant to disguise desperation. I deleted it without replying. I didn't need closure. I had clarity. One afternoon, I went for a walk through Central Park. I needed air, space, distance from strategy and statements. I didn't wear a suit, just a sweater and jeans. Nobody noticed me. Nobody cared. I passed children laughing near the fountain, couples wrapped in scarves and quiet affection, a man painting with water on the sidewalk. The normalcy of it reminded me that while the Burtons flailed in their sinking tower, the world kept spinning. Life kept living. On my way back, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Weston. The voice was familiar, tired, but unmistakably hers. "Isolde, I know I shouldn't have called," she said quickly. "But they're falling apart. My mother's having panic attacks. My father won't even leave the study. I don't know what you want." "That's the thing," I said, calm and measured. "It's not about what I want. It's about what I don't want anymore. I don't want to be the safety net. They're scared. They should be. I never meant for it to get this far. You never meant for it to cost you." Silence. "I told them not to treat you like that," she said after a long pause. "They didn't listen. I didn't listen. That's true." She took a breath. "Will you talk to Augustus? Ask him to slow the audits? Give them time." I stopped walking and looked out across the trees. "No," her voice cracked. "You're really not coming back, are you?" "No," I said, softly but firmly. "I was the bigger person for years. That's why I stayed. But that's also why I left." I ended the call. Not out of spite. Not even anger. Just necessity. That night, I met with Augustus in person. We sat on the penthouse balcony with tumblers of scotch in the silence of two men who'd seen too much and said very little about it. "They'll collapse," he said eventually. "Might not be tomorrow, but soon." "They were never stable to begin with," I said. "I just kept them from noticing." He turned toward me, a rare flicker of pride in his eyes. "Your father would have been proud. You've done what most men with power don't. You walked away from the fire without needing to throw more fuel on it. I'm just done playing firefighter for people who lit the match." He nodded. "What's next for you?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked out over the city. Something that doesn't need a spotlight to exist. The next morning, I received one final email from Maribel Burton. No salutation. No pleasantries. Just a sentence that read, "I hope one day you remember you were once part of our family." I stared at it for a long time, and then I wrote back, "I was never part of your family. I was your cover story, but not anymore." And I clicked send. No threats. No lawsuits. No media spectacle. Just the truth. They were burning their own bridges now. I didn't have to lift a single match. The inbox filled quickly, faster than I expected, actually. It was as if the moment the Burtons realized their dynasty was spiraling, they all remembered how to type with urgency. The subject lines were sharp, trying to slice through the silence I'd chosen. "Let's be reasonable. A conversation can fix this. Is this really what you want?" But none of them read like remorse. They read like a group of people waking up in a house they didn't know how to maintain now that the lights were off and the staff had left. Isolde's messages came first. Dozens of them. They started with the usual. "I was under pressure," she wrote. "There was so much going on that weekend." Then she leaned into nostalgia. "Remember our honeymoon in the vineyards? We said we'd always protect each other. I didn't mean for it to feel like this." That part almost made me pause. Almost. Then came the manipulation draped in velvet. "You know how important Thanksgiving is to us. You know how much this family needs you right now. Please don't abandon us." That word, abandon, had a way of catching in my throat. Not because it was true, but because it was her favorite trick. To accuse others of the very thing she'd done. The woman who had left me off a hotel reservation surrounded by her entire family, who called me the support act to my face in public, was now asking me not to abandon her. I closed her email and moved to the next. Her father sent a terse message. This doesn't need to become permanent. We're still connected, Weston. Through legacy, through name. That was all he wrote. No greeting. No punctuation beyond the period. Just a declaration of entitlement disguised as diplomacy. Her sister's email was longer. A rambling 3-paragraph essay about how everything just got complicated, and how loyalties got tangled, and how maybe, deep down, you always knew you didn't quite belong. That last part was probably the only honest sentence in the entire thing. But the one that made me stop, not respond, but stop, was from Ria. She had been Isolde's assistant for 3 years. Always quiet, efficient. The kind of person who blended into the background so well the Burtons often forgot she was in the room, even as she ran their lives behind the scenes. She never once pretended to like them, but she never let her professionalism slip either. Her message was short. Subject, thank you. Body, I've worked with the Burtons for 3 years. You were the only person who ever asked how I was doing. The only one who said thank you at the end of the day. I know what they did to you. I just wanted you to know, not everyone forgot what dignity looks like. Ria, I stared at the message for longer than I should have. Not because it said much, but because it said enough. It came from someone who had seen everything, who had nothing to gain from picking sides, and who chose to send kindness not as currency, but as truth. I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew she hadn't written it expecting one. I moved on. There were messages from journalists. Some disguised as inquiries, others shameless in their pitch. We'd love to feature your side. Our readers would benefit from your perspective. You've remained quiet, and that quiet is powerful. Are you ready to speak? No, I wasn't. Not to them. Not to anyone who wanted to turn this into spectacle. Because the spectacle had already happened. It played out across luxury lobbies and boardrooms, on gala stages and Instagram stories. The real story, the one that mattered, was the quiet truth. I had been invisible to them when they thought I couldn't affect their world. And now, when I had the power to collapse it, they suddenly remembered my name. They had erased me in the shadows. Now they wanted an invitation to my light. But I wasn't sending any. I walked down to the private gym that evening. My body ached from tension I didn't realize I'd been holding. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Anger had melted into a firmer, colder thing, resolve. I ran until my lungs burned, until the sweat stripped everything heavy from my chest. I let the rhythm clear my head. No music, no distraction, just breath and movement and silence. When I returned upstairs, there were more emails. I didn't open them. Instead, I went to the drawer in the penthouse bedroom. The one with the small white box I hadn't touched in months. The box that held a pearl hair clip I bought for Amy, Isolde's youngest cousin. I'd planned to give it to her on her birthday. She once told me in passing that she missed her grandmother's old clip, that the one she had was too fragile to wear. I found a replica in a boutique tucked into a back alley in Paris. It wasn't expensive, but it had meaning. I never got the chance to give it to her. That dinner was the night everything shifted, but I hadn't thrown it away either. I don't know why. Maybe because even in the wreckage of everything, there were still moments that felt worth preserving. Not because of what they meant to the Burtons, but because of what they meant to me. I held the clip in my hand for a moment. Then I put it back and closed the drawer. Some things are worth remembering, even if you never go back. The next morning, I walked to my favorite cafe, the one nobody in their world would be caught dead in. The tables were chipped. The barista had tattoos all the way up her arms. The coffee was strong enough to knock the wind out of you. And no one cared what your last name was. As I sat by the window, sipping in silence, I realized something. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology. Not for a reckoning. Not even for justice. I had already won. Because I had what none of them could manufacture, borrow, or post. Peace. And it wasn't something that could steal back with a well-worded email. So I ordered another cup, turned off my phone, and let the messages sit in the void where they belonged. It had been weeks since I opened that drawer. Weeks since I held that small, white box and stared at the delicate hair clip inside. Freshwater pearls set in gold, simple and elegant, designed for someone who still believed in quiet beauty. I'd bought it for Amy Burton on a whim, long before the lobby scene. before the truth came crashing through crystal chandeliers and carefully layered lies. It was meant for her birthday. She'd once told me she missed her grandmother's clip, the one that made her feel safe, seen. That one was too old and brittle to wear now. So I found its twin in a small Paris boutique, something thoughtful in a world that rarely made room for the soft-spoken. But the night I planned to give it to her, Maribel insulted a waiter. Isolde whispered to her sister that I'd be better seen and not heard, and her father made a joke about the charity case who married up. I remember watching Amy at that table, seated at the edge, as always, staring down at her water glass, retreating into herself as the rest of them talked over her. That was the night I knew I wouldn't give her the clip. Because that family turned gifts into leverage, and I didn't want her to feel like she owed me for a kindness they would twist. So I kept it. Tucked it away in the top drawer of the guest room in the Lion penthouse, beneath folded shirts and silent promises. And for a while, I forgot it was even there. Until now. That morning, I found myself staring at it again. Not with the intention of giving it, but with something else. Reflection. Maybe closure. I held it between my fingers and turned it in the light. It still gleamed, untouched by the noise, the chaos, the manipulation that tried to drown me. Somehow, it had remained intact, like a shard of who I used to be before all of this. I didn't know if Amy still lived in the city, or if she was still in contact with the rest of the Burtons. I didn't care. All I knew was that I'd seen something in her they never had: decency. And maybe one day, she'd understand that not all men who walk away do so in anger. Some do it in silence. With love. With intention. I left the penthouse and walked. Not toward her, not toward anyone. Just into the city, into the rhythm of it. Sometimes you need the world to remind you that your story is not the only one echoing between buildings. That pain, though personal, is also universal. My phone vibrated, but I didn't check it. I passed by a florist. The same one where I used to buy yellow roses for Isolde when we were still pretending. I remembered once bringing her a bouquet after she landed a brand deal. She had smiled, posted a picture with the caption, "He always knows." But she never said thank you. Never even looked up from her phone after that shot was taken. That memory didn't hurt anymore. It just sat there, like dust on an unused shelf. I walked on. When I returned to the penthouse that afternoon, there was a letter waiting for me at the concierge desk. Not an email. Not a text. A handwritten envelope, sealed with wax, bearing no name, just a familiar looping script. Amy. I didn't open it in the lobby. I took it upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the silence settle before I carefully broke the seal. It wasn't long. Barely a page. "Weston, I found the article. I know what they did. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I was afraid. Of them. Of being pushed out. But I wanted you to know. You were the only one who saw me. And when you left, I realized I didn't have to stay invisible. I'm moving out next week. I applied to a fellowship in Copenhagen. I think I got it. I don't know what the future holds, but I know it doesn't include them. Thank you for always seeing the people no one else does. Amy." I read it twice. Then I walked to the drawer, took out the clip, and placed it inside a small envelope. No note. No explanation. Just the gift, finally freed from its cage of timing and fear. The next day, I dropped it off at a mail center addressed to her new apartment. It felt right. Not to finish anything, but to continue something. The quiet resistance of kindness. That same evening, I attended a dinner hosted by Augustus. Private, select guests, no photographers, no media. Just people who knew how to move money without noise. The conversations were focused. Education equity, clean energy initiatives, venture capital as restoration instead of exploitation. My seat was at Augustus's right, but no one treated me like a shadow anymore. I wasn't Weston who married a Burton. I was Weston Walker, fund director, architect of his own name. After dinner, Augustus walked with me onto the balcony, his glass half full, his gaze distant. "You've changed," he said without looking at me. I think I just stopped apologizing. He nodded. "Your father would have liked that." We stood there in silence, two men who understood that some wars are won by not firing a single shot, just by refusing to be used. Before I left, he handed me a portfolio. "What's this?" "Your next venture," he said. "If you're ready." I opened it. Inside were outlines. Plans for a private grant system, accessible education funds for underserved students, financial literacy programs designed for schools that didn't have access to legacy wealth or endowments. It was bold. It was real. And it didn't need a family name to succeed. I closed the folder. I'm in. That night, back in the penthouse, I sat alone in the living room. The skyline blinked outside, quiet and alive. My phone vibrated again, another message from Isolde. This one said, "Do you ever think about what we had?" I didn't respond, because there's nothing to say when someone remembers love only after the spotlight fades. Instead, I turned the phone off, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window. Not everything that breaks needs to be repaired. Some things are meant to remain unfinished so that new things can begin. Like peace, like purpose, like the clip I never gave, now in the hands of someone who might finally understand what it meant. 3 months later, I signed the final papers. No courtroom, no press, no grand declarations. Just a quiet office in Midtown, a notary who barely looked up, and a signature that felt more like a release than a goodbye. Divorce, when done without love or loss, is just paper. Isolde had refused to contest anything, not out of grace, but exhaustion. The power she once held had been stripped clean, and she knew it. There were no assets for her to cling to, no trust fund cushion, no soft landing. She took what was left and disappeared into a version of her life that now felt duller without an audience. I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast. I just walked out of the building with my coat slung over my arm and a strange calm in my chest. There's something almost sacred about the moment you realize no one owns a piece of your story anymore. That you are not a prop or a pawn. That your name stands on its own. Augustus officially handed over the Lion Walker Impact Fund to me that same week. He did it without ceremony, just a brief handshake across a walnut desk and a nod that carried more weight than a standing ovation ever could. "It's yours now," he said. "Do with it what they never could. Build something that doesn't need your face to prove it has worth." And that's what I did. We restructured the fund into 3 branches: education, housing, and ethical capital. Grants were designed for first-generation college students, not just those with good grades, but those who held down jobs, cared for siblings, scraped by. We funded small housing cooperatives in neighborhoods luxury developers overlooked. We invested in businesses with transparent practices and community-rooted missions. No glossy elevator pitches, no unicorn startup fantasies. Just people who had been waiting for a chance. For the first time in years, my days were filled with purpose. Not with performance or approval, but actual work. Tangible impact. People who didn't ask where I'd come from, only how we could partner to do better. One evening, after a late strategy session, I walked past the Ludmere Hotel again. Same revolving doors. Same 2 bright lobby lights. But something had shifted. It wasn't me seeing it differently. It was that it now saw me differently. The staff at the entrance nodded without hesitation. The new general manager, a man Augustus had handpicked, recognized me instantly. "Mr. Walker," he said with the respect that had once been reserved for the Burtons. "We've just finished redesigning the suite you requested." I followed him inside, past the grand piano, past the marble floors I once walked on like an outsider. The elevator took us to the 15th floor, the Walker Suite. No longer the Burton wing. No longer a stage for someone else's performance. The plaque by the door had been replaced, dedicated to legacy through integrity. I stepped in. It wasn't opulent. It was intentional. Every detail chosen for comfort, not spectacle. Wood floors, slate countertops, a small reading nook by the window that overlooked the city like it was listening. A bottle of my favorite scotch sat on the bar card, untouched, but familiar. On the table, a simple card. "This is yours." I walked through the suite slowly, letting each room speak in its own quiet voice. There were no echoes of Isolde's laughter here. No mirrors to catch my reflection in comparison to someone else's design. Just space, and silence, and ownership. I sat down at the window and let the weight of everything settle behind me like dust finally finding its place. My phone buzzed, but I ignored it. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a list I had written on the night everything unraveled in the hotel lobby. A private list, 5 things I wanted when the storm was over. 1. Peace. 2. A name that meant something on its own. 3. A legacy rooted in something real. 4. A life without performance. 5. Someone who sees me, even in silence. I had 4 out of 5. And that 5th? I wasn't rushing it. I'd learned by now that anything real doesn't arrive dressed in applause. It comes softly, often unnoticed. Like a handwritten thank you. Like a child's laughter in a cafe. like a pearl hair clip finally finding the right hands. I stood, poured a drink, and walked out onto the private terrace. The city stretched out beneath me, endless and alive. I thought about my father, how he would have smiled to see this. Not the money, not the headlines, but the way I'd stopped letting other people write the caption for my life. I no longer craved the front row at charity galas or the approval of people who measured worth by proximity to power. I was building something different now. Something that wouldn't fall apart because one person forgot to include me on a list. Before I left the suite that night, I walked over to the wall near the bedroom. I reached into my wallet and took out a photo, an old one of my parents at a park picnic. My father grinning at my mother while she stole a bite of his sandwich. No captions. No filters. Just real life. I placed it on the shelf under the lamp. A reminder of what mattered, of where I came from. I didn't stay the night. I didn't need to. I had a home already, one I was still building, day by day, foundation by foundation. On my way out, I passed the front desk. The same one where the clerk once looked at me like I didn't belong. He looked up now and smiled. "Have a good night, Mr. Walker." I nodded. "You too." And I stepped out into the street, hands in my pockets, breath steady. This was no longer a story about loss. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclamation. The quiet rebuilding of a man who was once written off as a placeholder. I had become the author, and the next chapter would be mine, written not in whispers or spectacle, but in clarity and truth and choice. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I stopped asking for it.